Japan is a long, narrow island country with many mountains and a limited area of habitable space. This naturally forces many people to live in a relatively confined area. Here they are in a city, here they are from the perspective of a midget, and finally, the perspective of a cat. People began living on the Japanese islands on Tuesday, 100,000 BC. Until 14,000 BC, nothing really happened. Then, suddenly, pottery! The Jomon era had begun. Jomon refers to the rope-like pattern found on many pots and figurines from this era. The people living in the Jomon period were essentially hunter-gatherers. They may have done some farming or something, I don't know. Nothing really happened again until about 1000 to 500 BC when suddenly... rice! The Yayoi period saw wet rice farming people probably from China or Central Asia sweep into Japan through the Korean peninsula or the Ryukyu Islands. They brought an agrarian society to Japan and either mixed with or forced out the native Jomon population. Rice farming requires intensive group labor and cooperation in order to produce a large yield. Next, Kofun. By about 250 AD, various strong local clans called Gozoku developed, the strongest being the Yamato. Local animistic folk religions, now collectively called Shinto, also flourished. Chinese characters were slowly being introduced by immigrants from Korea and China. The Asuka period, from around 538 AD to 710 AD, was a great period of intellectual reform, and saw the first uses of the name Nihon to refer to the country. Buddhism came into Japan through Korea, and greatly influenced one of the great minds of Japan, Shotoku Taishi. Prince Shotoku was also well read in Chinese literature and wrote a 17-article constitution based on Confucian precepts in order to bring peace to Japan. Some excerpts are as follows. Harmony is to be valued, and an avoidance of wanton opposition to be honored. Decisions on important matters should not be made by one person alone. The skillful use of chopsticks is to be complimented. The Nara period from 710 AD till 794 AD saw the capital move to Nara, and the further importation of Chinese culture among the upper classes. Buddhism began to take root more deeply. Most of the population lived in villages and still followed native animistic beliefs. National identity was solidified, and the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki were written as histories of Japan. In the Heian period between 785 and 1185 AD, the capital was moved again, this time to Heian-kyo, if you're clever, or Kyoto, if you're not. The Fujiwara clan rose to prominence. Kukai and Saicho, two Buddhist monks, brought the Shingon and Tendai sects of Buddhism to Japan. Hiragana and katakana were created around this time with a very clever Iraha uta, using one of each to lay out the whole syllabary. Literature flourished, and the Genji Monogatari, the Pillow Book, and some other stuff was written. Government power began to be decentralized, and the warrior class began to appear. In 1185, the Kamakura period started. Minamoto no Yoritomo seizes power. Ikuni tsukuro! The disunity and violence of this period affected a surge in the popularity of Buddhism, and many new sects appeared. Eisai brings Rinzai Zen Buddhism and green tea into Japan. Pure Land Buddhism is introduced by Honen. Later, Dogen Zenji brings Soto Zen Buddhism to Japan. Zen is said to have been popular with the samurai class for its direct experience approach and lack of reliance on verbal communication and written teachings. Lots of infighting and 2 Mongol invasions followed. Both were repelled, but destabilized the government. The Kemu Restoration saw the Emperor Go-Daigo back in charge for a few years. Not for long! The Muromachi period from 1336 to 1573 saw Ashikaga Takauji depose Go-Daigo. Regional constables gained power and would later become daimyo. These daimyo directly controlled the land and kept presence in permanent serfdom in exchange for protection. There was a period of artistic innovation affecting architecture, literature, poetry, the tea ceremony, landscape gardening and flower arranging. Many small localized wars broke out all across the country, eventually plunging the whole country into a full-scale civil war by 1500. The Sengoku Jidai had begun. Western traders turned up one day in 1543 at Tanegashima bearing guns, very popular, and Christianity, not so popular. During the following years, traders from Portugal, the Netherlands, England, and Spain arrived. Christianity was eventually banned, then strongly persecuted as being a corrupting influence. 50 years after the arrival of guns, Japan probably had more guns than any other country in the world, even Compton. The period of civil war came to an end after 3 successive warlords, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. The Battle of Sekigahara marked a turning point in Japanese history. The Tokugawa claimed the title of Seii Taishogun and started a 250-year military dictatorship. Foreign trade was essentially banned, and Japan entered a period of seclusion from the outside world. Local lords or daimyo had no autonomy over their own provinces, but had to pay tribute to the shogun and maintain expensive residences in the new capital, Edo. A strict hierarchical class system based on Neo-Confucian thought was developed. The Mibunsei saw samurai on top, peasants second, craftsmen third, and merchants in last place. Strict rules were formed for each level of society. The individual had no rights, the smallest unit of responsibility being the family. Citizens were made responsible for each other's behavior. Japanese culture once again developed in seclusion. Nothing really happened again until 1853, when Matthew Perry and his black ships appeared in Edo Bay. Japan's borders were forced open and many daimyo lost confidence in the Tokugawa regime. Anti-foreign and anti-Tokugawa elements surfaced. Sono Joi! In 1868, Tokugawa Yoshinobu stepped down as shogun. The Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown by an alliance of Satsuma and Choshu. The Meiji period from 1868 to 1912 saw the abolishment of the feudal system, modernization of the military, and numerous Western systems of government adopted. Western thought Japanese spirit was an important maxim. State Shinto was created and almost entirely removed from the influence of Buddhism. Christianity was also legalized, and Confucian thought was still applicable. Japan rapidly became a world power. From 1902 to 1923, Japan and Britain had a military alliance. Japan went to war with China and Russia in order to expand its empire and achieve equal footing with Western nations. The Taisho period saw the old government chiefs forced out of power and a move towards a more democratic system of government. Western influence on art, literature, and philosophy was felt. Democratic, socialist, communist, and anarchist schools of thought had an influence on many of the intelligentsia of the time. The seeds of universal suffrage were sown. Japan briefly entered World War I on the side of Britain. The Showa era saw Japan become increasingly militaristic, and ultranationalism began to emerge. Many felt that Japan was industrializing too quickly and becoming too Western. Japan participated in the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Second World War. After the war, the American occupation demilitarized Japan. The emperor renounced all claims to divinity. In 1952, Japan once more became a sovereign state. Westernization continued, with music and movies influencing a new generation of Japanese youth. Japanese culture also began to be exported in the form of monster movies, anime, and manga. The post-war period saw the Japanese economy grow phenomenally through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. By 1991, the bubble had burst. The following 10 years saw economic recession and a generation gap appear between the job-for-life post-war generation and an increasing number of displaced young people working in part-time employment. Japan is currently the second largest economy in the world, producing motor vehicles, industrial and transportation equipment, electronics, chemicals, steel, machine tools, and so on for export around the world. Japanese traditional culture and modern culture still exist side by side and continue to be exported abroad. With an aging population and increasingly economically viable neighbors, we must ask what the future holds for Japan. What does the future hold for Japan? The answer? I don't know.